This is Chris Ruddy, and I love Gene Valentino's GrassRoots TruthCast. Make sure you're tuning in just like I do every day, every week, every minute.
With breaking news and political commentary from a public servant, serial entrepreneur, community leader, philanthropist, and American patriot, and a darn nice guy, it's time for the GrassRoots TruthCast and your host, Gene Valentino.
Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of GrassRoots TruthCast. I'm Gene Valentino. You know, during these episodes where I have the chance to interview other people, as you know, they're social, they're political, they're economic, they're spiritual, they come from various walks of life. I had the privilege of meeting a young lady in the Newsmax green room not too long ago. Her name is Nicole Kiprilov. She's a political operative and strategist. She's worked with Vicky Palladino, who is a member of the City Council of the City of New York. She's done work with other leaders in Congress that she's going to have the chance to talk to you about. What really triggered me to wanting Nicole on this GrassRoots TruthCast episode is her depth of knowledge on political strategy and the trend. She's not a Gen Zer, but she should be, because I think she represents the new generation of youth and younger generation coming into the political scene. And God willing, more are like her. Nicole Kiprilov will be joining me on the GrassRoots TruthCast right after this.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to announce the next generation of energy drinks, Rev 7. It has no sugar and no caffeine. Instead, Rev 7 uses GO-BHB. GO-BHB is one of the body's primary ketones, and it provides the most efficient and clean fuel that your body needs. It also helps you stay energized all day with no crashes. Not only that, it produces 3 times more brain energy than sugar, which helps boost your memory, focus, and mental sharpness. It also helps reduce stress and helps balance your mood. Rev 7 does all that while being the best tasting energy drink ever. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save 20% today. I'm so sure you're going to love Rev 7. For a limited time, you get our introductory 3-pack absolutely free. I drink Rev 7 every day, and I absolutely love it, and so will you.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to the GrassRoots TruthCast. Gene Valentino here, and joining me today is Nicole Kiprilov. She's a political operative and strategist from New York City, native New Yorker, graduated in 2019 from Duke University, has with a double BA and political science major in French, specializing in political theory, a minor in philosophy, oh my words, certification in philosophy and politics and economics. Nicole, thank you for joining me. Continue with the resume, because I'm going to run out of steam. I can't finish all the great things you've done at a very young age. I had the chance to meeting you, Nicole, in the green room at Newsmax. You were contributing to Newsmax just as I was, and I said to myself, I'm not letting her get by. We got to get her on GrassRoots TruthCast. Welcome aboard, Nicole.
Thank you so much for having me, Gene. It's a pleasure, and it was so great to meet you.
And my pleasure indeed. Talk to me about where you are and what you're doing. Let's start from the beginning. Where is Nicole in her path here? Because I mean, I'm sure Newsmax, you've contributed on Newsmax, but you've got a crazy background before you even talk about everything else.
Well, you know, I always like to start when people ask me about myself and why I got involved in politics and in this industry. I always like to start with my family, because I think while my background isn't unique, I think there are a lot of families like mine. It has been incredibly influential to my development, my career development, and certainly my personal development. My parents are both immigrants from Eastern Europe, and my mom in particular was actually an anti-communist revolutionary in Bulgaria in the 80s. So she worked to bring down the communist regime in Bulgaria, and she has a revolutionary spirit, and she's always been incredibly political. But I wrote a piece about my mom that was published on Tom Klingstein's website, and it was basically detailing the story of how my family came to this country, legally immigrated. My parents met here and they got married. They're both from Bulgaria, and
But they were exiting the attempted communist takeover at the time, were they not?
yes, and my mom worked to bring down the communist government in Bulgaria. So she was out on the street, she was protesting, she was inside of government as well, applying pressure in that way too. She has quite an interesting story. And after communist fell, after there was a regime change in Bulgaria, she decided to come here for a better life and to give her family, better future. And that's when she met my dad. And they started a business from scratch, from nothing, together after they met and got married. And they built it up into a successful construction company and were able to give me the best education and pretty much any opportunities that I could have ever dreamed of. So I was lucky enough to witness my parents making the American dream happen right before my eyes. And we would talk about politics at the dinner table, lifelong conservatives with conservative values. And my mom has been a very big supporter of Donald Trump even before he was president, even before he was thinking of being president. And so that's why, she's such a big patriot. She's very America first, big Trump supporter
Right.
because he represents her American dream. He represents the incredible opportunities that she was given when she came here. So I grew up with that mentality. I've been very political, went to the best schools, like you said, Duke, was always the priority was always to get the best education. And, after I graduated, I really wanted to go to law school. And until I was ready to apply, I decided to start getting some work experience. And that's when I applied to government offices on Long Island. I'm from Long Island, New York, born and raised. And I got a position at the New York State Senate working for State Senator Phil Boyle, a prominent New York State senator, and did legislative work for him, was his communications director, ran his reelection campaign, started to run local campaigns on Long Island, and then I went to the New York City Council. I was a chief of staff to Councilmember Vicky Palladino, did a lot of work there in a very turbulent time. This was right after COVID, the vaccine mandates. We were working to reinstate frontline workers. If you remember the drag queen story hour scandal, that conversation was started by Vicky Palladino, actually, while I was her chief of staff. And we did a lot of work bringing awareness to that. And, New York City is radically leftist, as we all know. And so it was very challenging, but it was an amazing learning experience for me. Then
And how did you grow up in that environment with you're coming out of a more conservative cloth, a conservative bent, and your upbringing is certainly it speaks well. And I'm trying to determine how conservatives like you survive in that environment, a very liberal left environment, a harsh environment in New York like that. How does that happen for someone like you?
Well, it's a good question because I hear so many of my friends and just people who I'm not friends with, talk about how difficult it is to be conservative in New York. And it definitely is. And I think most Republican New Yorkers are closeted, especially if you work in the corporate world. And, until recently, there were very severe consequences if your boss or your colleagues found out that you were Republican. Republicans in New York have been censored, they've been fired, they have been assaulted. And so, but for me, I think I was just lucky because I've always worked in, my first job was in government and politics working for the Republican Party. And I also was always taught to just, be who I am and be outspoken. I was outspoken in college. I remember at Duke, we had John Podesta, who was at the time Hillary Clinton's campaign advisor, and he came to speak on campus, and it was a big auditorium. It was a big, actually, a pavilion with 300 people, and he was getting interviewed by a professor at Duke, and I decided to ask him a question. I decided to ask him about all the scandals he was involved in. Uranium One, the Podesta group with his brother, Pizzagate, and I didn't attack him, but I think everyone, a lot of people wanted to know, right? They wanted to know about these scandals that he was entrenched in. And I asked him that question. He got so triggered that he cursed on live TV twice at me. And then it made the news. I got harassed after, I got death threats after. I didn't even intend to do that, but I've just always been very outspoken, and I've never really struggled to make friends or, be respected.
I wonder how many times Donald Trump cursed out someone else the way Mr. Podesta did. I don't think the liberal left tolerate the level of criticism or questioning the way the Republicans do, generally speaking. And what happened after that event? Were you persona non grata at the local station?
No, no. Look, I had a really good relationship with my professors, and actually the vice president of Duke at the time, he was a raging liberal, but he and I had a good relationship, and I think, I did receive threats, but I got a lot of letters saying thank you for speaking out. So, yeah, I mean, I think I think it's really important, especially now. I think now is a much easier time if you're a college student. Maybe not if you're a Jewish college student, because there's just rampant anti-Semitism. But I do think President Trump's election, the resounding mandate, close to 80 million people voting for him, winning all the swing states. I think we're in a mindset shift in this country, and it's a lot easier, I think, to be a Republican and a conservative and be outspoken than it was back in 2016. And I attribute that to President Trump, actually. I think he should get credit for that. He's done tremendous work, not just implementing policies, obviously, and getting results, but this cultural shift that he's brought about over the course of a decade. It's phenomenal.
Well, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik has made the headlines lately. She stepped away from her UN ambassador position to retake, so to speak, the congressional seat she was about to vacate. She did so to make sure that we had the numbers necessary in Congress. But you worked for her, and tell me about that relationship.
Well, she's a great person, and I think she's someone who's very authentic, and you just know that from meeting her for a couple of minutes even, she really cares about her constituents, and that's her priority always, no matter what. And so I think that the fact that President Trump was asked her to do that, asked her to give up her UN nomination to stay in Congress so that we don't risk losing that seat, is a testament to how much he respects and trusts her. And he knows, and she took it very well, because, again, her priority is her constituents, and her priority is ensuring that President Trump is able to fulfill his America First agenda that over 77 million Americans voted for. So she's a public servant through and through. And I think that's definitely rare, not just on a federal level, but on a state and local level as well. I talk about this a lot, actually. Sometimes I do speaking engagements. I love talking to college students. And I always talk about the importance of remembering that when you work in this industry, even if you're not an elected but an operative or a media personality, you're still a public servant if you're in this industry. And a lot of people forget that, and ego gets in the way, and they make it about them. And look, I'm a communications professional. I understand that brand building is so very important. If you're an elected, if you're an operative, if you want to get on media, it's very important. But there's a way you can build your brand without losing touch with your authenticity and this mentality that it's not about you, it's about the work that you're doing for the people, for the American people.
It's very interesting the position you've taken and where you stand on the issues. I find it most interesting and refreshing. You were press secretary for Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, and I know you were communications operative, for lack of a better word. She either groomed you right or you helped her immensely. But all I can say is I'm so glad she came back and managed the culture of what Mike Johnson needed for support in the House. Where does Elise Stefanik end up with you in your mind? What's the future there?
I think she would be fantastic in any position. She has, she I think she has her strong issue areas that she really cares about, but I think she would shine in any role, whether that's, a role in representing New York in some capacity, or it's a cabinet position, or now or in the future, whatever it is. I think she has the experience, she has the care, the passion. Obviously, she's incredibly smart and sharp, and I think she would be great in whatever she does.
I'm so pleased with the way she stood up for all this anti-Semitism, and I find it it's heartbreaking to me to see so much of this vitriol in New York City, one of the glamorous cities in the nation, falling by the wayside because of the amount of corruption at one level and bad behavior and lack of cultural integrity that has poisoned the city like a cancer. Just switching gears a little bit, the Republicans stepped up and supported the English First bill, meaning the official language for America is English. But that must not bother you, a woman with about six different languages you're versed in. I never asked you how many languages in particular, but how many languages?
Oh, it's not six, Gene. I mean, I grew up speaking, well, obviously, I mean English, but I actually, English is my second language. I grew up speaking Bulgarian at home. And
Bulgarian.
yes, which is my parents' native language. And for them, it was very important that I remember where my family comes from. And I think that's very valuable. And so
Yeah.
I also learned how to read and write in Bulgarian growing up. And so I can speak it fluently. I read it, I write it. I've been to Bulgaria many times and absolutely love it there. I have family and friends there. And I speak French too. I studied French for about a decade. And then I lived in Paris for a little bit. I interned at the Parisian Philharmonic, and
Oh my.
I took classes in Paris and studying French culture and politics, and it was wonderful. And I'm a big fan of Marine Le Pen. I actually wrote my senior thesis on her, and so that was very, very interesting. I loved studying her. And then
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I took Spanish classes. It's actually easy to go from French to Spanish, much easier than going from Spanish to French. And so
Right.
studied Spanish too. And
So
when
we're
you
up to, I hear four languages there. I wasn't that far off.
yeah.
Hey, it's funny you bring this up though, because you're talking about what America really is, and we're the melting pot of so many different cultures. My grandfather, an Italian immigrant, on my dad's side of the family. I'm half Italian. The other half is English, Irish, and French. And so when I'm going through school, my dad's getting a little frustrated because you can learn Spanish, you can learn French, German. How come they're not teaching Italian? My father would complain and about.
Beautiful
And
language.
I was a snot-nosed kid who didn't know any better. And my grandfather, who's a decorated hero from World War I here in the United States,
Wow.
ends up scolding my father in front of me and saying, "Don't worry about that. He doesn't need to learn Italian. We all need to learn English." Coming from an Italian immigrant, he
Wow.
could barely speak English in my younger days, and he couldn't write it, but he was so proud to become an American and receive the honor and privileges of what everything America could bring him and the family. And it brought us a lot. That this issue of what language. Here's an immigrant who's working so hard to speak English. And a lot of people felt the same way during that period of time in that era. Today, you've got to decipher what channel you're on. It may not be in a language you understand. And it's just a difference in time. And I have no barbs to throw against any other culture or language because we are a nation of immigrants. But I think, like there's a strong respect that we have first for America and English and the American way of life, which presumably is why they're here in the first place. So I find that very interesting about you because that's what I picked up. I also found out something very interesting about you as well. You're a classic pianist and violinist and a taekwondo.
Not anymore. Not anymore. I did that for a very long time, but I
Okay.
haven't I haven't played piano or violin or practiced taekwondo in years, but I did that for my entire, I would say, young,
Younger
childhood
life.
and young adulthood. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in any event, you're quite accomplished. Let's switch to topics. That's what brought us together, were the topics that we got introduced to. You've been on One America News, the Real America Voices. You've been a contributor at the Daily Caller and writes for several other publications. But where Nicole and I met was right at Newsmax. And, we have so many issues that Newsmax calls us up on, and they vary from day to day. So let's move into the world of direct politics, immigration, maybe the transgender debate. Let's talk about, I'll tell you what, let's start with Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Just today, he's being called out by some Democrats in Congress to demand that he resign as Secretary of Defense. It had to do with an issue involving a communication on his private Signal platform, and apparently his wife had access to it and saw some of what was going on. Do you think she's the first spouse in a marriage in a political whose spouse is in a political position? Do you think she's the first that got a glimpse at some national security issues?
No, no, certainly not. No, I
Hi,
mean,
my point is what about a woman by the name of Jill Biden, who in fact was probably running the presidency for her husband's incapacitation? You want to make an analogy there first.
right, well, but completely different because Jill Biden had to step in because Joe Biden was not mentally, he was mentally impaired. He was
Yes, I'm so
cognitively
glad to hear you say that.
put
It makes it even worse, though.
this was the biggest cover up, the biggest scandal, the biggest media cover up in American history. You had the media was complicit. You had staffers were complicit. Kamala Harris was complicit. Elected Democrats were complicit in this cover up. And that's why Joe Biden I don't know if it was Joe Biden or if it was Barack Obama or if it was people whose names we don't even know, the Soros
Yeah,
family. It could be all of these people. It probably is. The point is, Joe Biden was mentally impaired for a very long time, and all of these people and groups were gaslighting the American public, trying to gaslight the American public into thinking that we are crazy for looking at someone who was basically a walking corpse and saying, wow, I wonder who's in charge. It can't be him. But this is a completely different situation with the defense secretary because this chat, it was made very clear that the chat was created for administrative and scheduling purposes. There was no sensitive military operations discussed, no classified information shared. The point here is that they are after Pete Hegseth, and they're after him because he's an outsider. He was brought in to shake things up and to root out this pervasive leftist ideology that basically destroyed the Department of Defense under Joe Biden.
yeah,
Now, the defense industrial complex, they're very scared because
yeah.
they're going to lose jobs. They're going to lose a lot of money, Gene, because Pete Hegseth is exposing the truth about what is actually happening at the Pentagon. How many millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, have gone towards setting up DEI offices in every branch of the military? How many millions of dollars have gone towards funding operations for transgender service members? Actually, it's $250,000 per transgender service member. Every
Wow.
transgender service member eats up $250,000. And all of this, I mean, the defense contractors advising military commanders on how to lead inclusively. This has no place in our military. Not only does it have no place in our military, it actually sacrifices military strength and readiness and competence and excellence. And Pete Hegseth has been talking about this, one of the only people who has been talking about this for a very long time. He wrote a whole book on it where he shows how deeply he understands these issues and how
I submit that's one of the reasons President Trump considered him, for that reason.
absolutely,
Yeah.
because President Trump saw it as a priority that we restore the warrior ethos in our military, because this is a national security, this is a matter of national security. And
It's amazing to me, a young lady like you, and I say that with all respect, not anything condescending, that a person like you has the ability to see that and to see it with such clarity of thought. It is some of the inner workings of the deep state's attempt to take down this nation. Some of it has been a cancer working from within, and you've just articulated one of those missions that the deep state has been on to hurt the nation. A guy like Pete Hegseth coming in. And what about the double standard? Before we talk about his wife having access to a communication, what was going on with Hunter Biden's laptop? My God, what was on that? That went to the FBI that no one wants to talk about. I don't know. Any comment?
well, look, when it comes to the left, the hypocrisy is just off the charts. I mean, it's so blatantly in your face because they will criticize Republicans and the right for doing something which they're not actually doing, but that the left is doing. So they've often used this term weaponization. Right now, President Trump is weaponizing agencies. What were Democrats doing? What was Joe Biden doing for 4 years? He was weaponizing the Department of Justice, weaponizing the FBI to go after a former Attorney General Merrick Garland, actually called on the FBI to go after Christians,
Yeah.
Catholics in churches, to use counterterrorism resources on parents who were standing up at school board meetings and saying, why are you asking school boards, why are you sexualizing my children with this CRT gender ideology curriculum? So, it's just the hypocrisy. And I think the American people see it very clearly.
I think they see it, and I use the term divert, Gino's 3 Ds: divert, deflect, and distract. They are taking your attention off their wrongdoing and accusing you of the very same things that they're guilty of, that to avoid the prosecution of themselves. And I'm not just talking about the Joe Biden era. I mean, this goes back to Barack Obama and to Clinton. How much has been happening during the generations that you've been exposed to alone? I came out of an era where J. Edgar Hoover was the big principal first in the FBI back in the 1950s. And through the Kennedy administration, John F. Kennedy had such a difficult time dealing with the likes of Hoover. He had audio and video recordings of alleged sexual misconduct by politicians that was then used as a threat by the FBI, by Hoover, to garner support in a certain position. The weaponization of the agencies of our government being used against ourselves, transitioned to the Congress, then becoming able to manufacture. Here's the one for you I'd like to discuss. The funding of the United States Congress on the Democrat side for political campaigns has come from NGOs, non government organizations, to bring people into office. It's evidenced at the national level, most recently with Kamala Harris getting, what was it, $1.5 billion thereabouts to run a campaign against Donald Trump, who won the election with 80 million votes, you said, for a fraction of that $1.5 billion. Now, to me, tells me the American public has awakened to the deep state malfeasance at that level, not only of congressional leaders, but the president, the candidates for president, the judiciary, the attorneys general, prosecutors, whether elected or appointed, Letitia James, for example, are it's like the onions being peeled back now, Nicole. And slowly and painfully slowly, justice isn't happening fast enough to make me happy. But we see that it's happening. And to me, it's why I think democracy is going to survive. Our constitutional republic will survive itself, albeit warts and bumps and all its own shortcomings. It is the longest standing governance in the world. And we're coming upon a 250th anniversary of our system of government here in America. And I see an opportunity for a rebound if we correct it. And let's talk a little bit more about those shortcomings, and then let's talk about, if it was Congresswoman Kiprilov, let's talk let's talk about what you would recommend the United States Congress and our president do to remedy these shortcomings. And then I have a response of what I think the remedy should be. What would you do, Madam Congresswoman, to fix some of these ills?
Well, it's a really tough question, Gene. I'm going to have to think about that a lot to come up with
Let's start with
but
the election, the ballot harvesting, and the problems with the election ballot tampering, I should say, machine tampering. Let's start there, just on the election voting process for a minute.
Well, look, first of all, I think what Michael Whatley and Lara Trump did at the RNC this past election cycle was a really good model
Yeah.
for how we should approach all future elections. Now, I wasn't entrenched in that process, but I did get an opportunity to talk to Lara Trump about it. I did get an opportunity to talk to Michael Whatley about it. And it was a very different operation than what they had in 2020. And that's why in 2020, it was a mess. It was a disaster because I don't think Republicans, I don't think even President Trump himself was prepared for that sort of fraud, right? For that kind of voter fraud. And, it's not just happening at the national level, it's happening at state level and local level as well. But having gone through that experience, which a lot of people are saying, look, it's really, and I agree with this, everything in God's timing, it's a very good thing that President Trump didn't win, or I believe he won, but that things happened in that way in 2020 because he took all of that, all of lessons learned and all of the horrific things that happened to him and his family, like getting shot, literally getting shot, and he turned it into this massive operation that was just stellar in every regard, whether it was from a communications perspective or it was from a voters election integrity perspective. They had lawyers on the ground. I know from 2020, they didn't have enough lawyers. They didn't have enough poll watchers. They did not have people. There was evidence. There were people sending videos of ballot harvesting and of voter fraud and people who weren't registered, people who were illegal immigrants, voting. And there was all of this evidence and there was footage of it. And we were seeing it come in piecemeal. But I don't think they had that strong operation in place to, first of all, prevent all of that from happening. And second of all, respond to it in a timely and adequate manner when it was happening. And that was just a very completely different operation in 2020.
And that operation requires money. An
Yeah.
operation that the Democrats had in place was in my opinion, part of a deep state. Hey, I have it right here. This is a book written by Scott Walter, and it's entitled Arabella. Its caption says, "The Dark Money Network of Leftist Billionaires Secretly Transforming America." And it goes on to talk about how the sheer quantity of money that has flowed through Arabella's channels is staggering. In the 2020 election you just referred to, Arabella's nonprofits took $2.4 billion, more than the fundraising of the Democratic and Republican National Committees combined. And in the 2022 election cycle, Arabella's fundraising rose to about $3 billion. The book goes on to describe how that money went to all of the Democrat candidates throughout the nation, not Republicans.
And look at this. Since the start of George Soros's Open Society Foundation, he has given Democrat NGOs and candidates $32 billion. $32 billion funding protests, funding causes. Everything is orchestrated. That's
including the Elon Musk recent protests against.
Absolutely. And look at what happened with the EPA. Lee Zeldin, whom I know well, deeply respect him. He was congressman from New York.
Yep.
I've known him for a while. He's doing a fantastic job at the EPA. He uncovered this billions of dollars in a slush fund, part of it headed by Podesta, part of it operated by Stacey Abrams, billions of dollars that were getting funneled through NGOs, that were getting funneled through organizations, nonprofits that would be stood up months before the election. They were not registered. There are no IRS filings on them. A lot of shady things happening. And all of this is money. A lot of it is taxpayer money. And so they have, I can't pretend to know exactly how all of this works. I'm not, I don't know exactly every single detail of how it's structured together, but it is 100% all pre-planned. And the way it operates is how it was meant to operate, how the Democrats meant it to operate. Nothing is an accident. Everything is about funneling all of this money into Democrat politicians' pockets. It's the same thing with why are they pushing through on a state level? Why are they pushing through in state legislatures bills that would allow for illegal immigrants to vote? Because illegal immigrants are going to vote for Democrats. Why are they churning out radicals on college campuses? Because those radicals are going to go on and vote for Democrats so they stay in power. I mean, this is all, it's not a conspiracy theory, and there's so much more to this. I'm not even scratching the surface here. There's so much more to this.
Well, let me jump in and tell you, how about right now in the 6 o'clock news, Senator Chris Van Hollen, senator from Maryland, and this detainee in El Salvador, Mr. Kilmer Albrego Garcia. Why is it so important to worry about the rights of this one person who's illegal, who's a criminal, who's killed people, who's a known member of MS-13, to get that tattoo on your hand or your fist or your chest? you must have gone through a qualification process, which includes killing people. Why is it that this United States Congress is getting behind that kind of ilk? You just said it, to garner them as Democrats to vote. Sealing the deal with taxpayer money, allegedly, but it's NGO money for sure. And the three key pictures here. I was told by the author there's about 20 names he could, but he could only fit three faces. You can see in the center that's George Soros. On the right is Bill Gates. On the left is our buddy Mark Zuckerberg. And they're all kissing up to who right now? Donald Trump.
Trump. Well,
Okay.
actually, Senator Van Hollen did say it was taxpayer money. He did admit to it. He
Well,
straight
now
up
on his trip, that's true. So
yeah.
we have a known criminal sitting behind bars in a country that we have no jurisdiction over, and he feels the need to use taxpayer money to get down there and bring him home. He's not home, Nicole. Home is not Maryland. In fact, he has an abused wife who's struggling to say anything nice about him on the national news. But he's coming, Van Hollen's trying to bring him home because he's assuming he has rights as an American citizen and has been denied due process. Now, wait a minute. You're an American. I'm an American. I'll take a little due process. I'll make sure my rights are, I hope my rights are protected first. He doesn't get any rights or due process. Why are they making such a stink about it in the national news about his denial of due process when he's not an American citizen and he's one of the millions that have come over the line illegally, killed people, raped women and children, and bringing in that fentanyl with the help of China to kill how many? Hundreds of thousands nationwide.
A million since 2018. 250,000 Americans have died from fentanyl overdose.
250,000. At least that, right?
Since 2018. Yep. It's a lot of people.
It's obscene.
A lot of people. It's a lot of people.
So we as journalists, we as commentators and contributors on these networks have to get this story out independent, because the networks won't describe it and articulate it sometimes in the level of detail you and I can for their own reasons. But we have an obligation to help the citizens of this nation understand just how close we were to losing America recently. Thank God in holy heaven, Donald Trump got elected. The system.
His life was spared even before he got elected. That his life was spared. That bullet was so close.
Listen, man almost loses his life twice. Once in Pennsylvania, Butler, Pennsylvania.
That we know of. I think there were probably more that Iran was involved in. Yep.
Yeah, that's correct. And not to mention these two recent characters, the gentleman's name who was staked out on the perimeter of Mar-a-Lago was an individual who was communicating with Ukraine and looking for refuge there. Was even looking for some sort of missile or explosive missile that he could get his hands on, that a rocket launcher of sorts to take out President Trump at his facility in Mar-a-Lago, is to me a complicit effort that's broader than what we see, what the average American sees. You know, the beauty is we elect our president. That's what the constitutional republic is. It's the only person all of us elect. I mean, we have congressmen, local representatives, and so forth, but it's only the president that everyone in this nation votes for. That's not so in other parliaments like England or other governances in Europe and the EU. You don't know who your leader is going to be because the inner circle of their parliament actually picks the final leader. Very much like the cardinals are meeting right now to decide who the next pope's going to be. It's not a worldwide vote per se. It's a cluster of an internal organization, but that's spiritual and religious based. It's not a governance per se. The point is that these people are trying to protect their bureaucracy. And that's where America was going. Yes or no, your comment, please. The bureaucracy that Donald Trump is now breaking up is the silent cancer that goes levels down below the elected person that was controlling this government. And the elected person could not execute on his principles and policies that the citizens locally voted him in for because the bureaucracy was saying, well, that's nice, but now you're here in DC in the swamp with us, and this is the way it's going to be. And it was just yesterday the Democrats were getting their marching orders from Nancy Pelosi. Not so with Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson, as head of the Speaker of the House, is more welcoming to the other congressmen and women for input in creating final policy. It's also what trips them up a little and why things get delayed, but at least they're getting representation from everybody. What say you on that distinction?
Well, look, I think, Mike Johnson I think he's a really good person. I think he's a very principled conservative, and he is in a very tough spot. He's in a tough spot because, I think there's more, there is unity, but there's still some division. We saw that with, budget reconciliation, the blueprint before it unlocked budget reconciliation. We saw, there were some dissenters there, and it was, he was trying his best to push that through because I think Mike Johnson is incredibly committed to President Trump's America First agenda. I think President Trump definitely trusts him. But I do want to make a point about, you talked about the bureaucracy. I think that's why Elon Musk was appointed head of Doge. That's why President Trump signed an executive order to create Doge, because that's what they're doing. They're slashing bureaucracy. And of course, with that comes all these false narratives, right? I think one less talked about area we've seen these false narratives is at the Veterans Affairs Department. I just wrote a couple of articles on that about the false narratives that the mainstream media is starting about what Secretary Doug Collins is doing at the VA and how he, is slashing all these essential positions when in reality he set aside all of the, I think it was a couple of thousand essential positions at the VA, did not touch any of them. He's slashing DEI positions. He's slashing grants for, related to transgender ideology at the VA, because that money should be going to severely injured veterans some of whom are losing their lives because they can't get access to the VA. The VA system does not work. The VA bureaucracy is one of the worst bureaucracies that we have right now in this country. I mean, you hear veterans talking about this all the time because they need access to mental health resources. They need access to life-saving care. These are people who have who have sacrificed almost everything to fight for this country. These are people we should be honoring. Not only have they had to endure war and so much brutality, but they come back here and they can't even get basic health care because that money is going towards, transgender surgeries and it's going towards DEI offices at the VA, and it's just so mismanaged. So the bureaucracy at the VA, Secretary Doug Collins, I think, is doing such a great job in combination with Doge to cut that. But I do want to make a point about Senator Van Hollen and what he did, because I think you mentioned that, everything is orchestrated like we talked about. The Democrats have a plan, but we see that backfiring. Right now, we're in a point in time where this is just backfiring so tremendously. What Senator Van Hollen did is he essentially set the stage for the midterm elections. The American people, it helps. What he did was actually very good for Republicans, because it further helps inform the American people to know what they will be voting for in the midterms. They're either going to be voting for the side that supports morality, victims, and common sense, or they're going to be voting for the side that supports rapists and murderers. And there is no in between. Once upon a time, there was an in between when the Democrat Party wasn't was it going to El Salvador to meet with brutal gang members, illegal immigrant gang members who have beaten their wives and done worse even. Now it's the distinction is so clear. And so, I actually saw what he was doing as a positive because he just, I know he's not doing, obviously that wasn't his intention, but it's backfiring. It shows you also that the left for so long, I mean, feminism is another topic I love talking about. I'm a, fellow at the Independent Women's Forum, and I talk about that issue a lot, but I think, the left, conservative women's issues are very important to me. But a point here about that, it also shows that the left for so long has tried to convince, the American people that they are the party of the Democrat Party is the party of women, that they care about women, when it's the exact opposite. The left hates women. Abrego Garcia abused his wife, and under the and now, the mainstream media is saying, well, she came out and said good things, and the restraining order was pulled. Well, it was pulled because he's a member of MS-13. You think he didn't threaten her? You think she's not scared of retaliation? Why else would she file a restraining order and then pull it, right? I mean, that's common sense. There was a 600% increase in sex trafficking of women and girls under the Biden administration. If that's one statistic, that's the only statistic you need to know how much the left hates women. And so I think that's, another takeaway from this Van Hollen incident as well.
Yeah, there's an old saying, when the enemy is committing suicide, let them.
Right.
You mentioned the midterm elections. They have just painted themselves into a corner so badly that I think this is what Donald Trump needed assurance of in the midterm elections. And it's important from my point of view because whether he figures out how to run for another term, he has certainly set up a new generation of Donald Trumpisms going on in government with most of his staff half his age. And what's going on is the new generation of Trump is ready to carry the baton into the future. And one thing I think we need is a constitutional amendment that starts to put penalties in place. Look at all the time we've spent discussing the wrongdoings emanating from bad behavior in and around government officials, and their agencies or their agents. This is what we've been spending our time talking about. So I propose, and it's on, folks, it's on www.genevalentino.com. Look at Gino's second Bill of Rights. As you know, the first Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. I propose 10 more amendments to the Constitution. And one of them is criminal penalties to elected officials and their associates, agencies, departments, anybody working in and around government will be criminally responsible, not protected by government, but responsible for criminal wrongdoings and be treated as a criminal, civil or criminal consequences for the wrongdoing they do when they use their weight and force of office to perpetrate a fraud, go after other political opponents, manipulate the election process. I could go on. The use of their office for personal gain should be a crime, and there's too much wiggle room to get out of it, Nicole. I want to see a strong amendment in place that puts these people away. Now, the short term, and I say this regrettably, because I used to be an elected official as a county commissioner, and I served 2 terms. That's 8 years in this case. I kind of wanted to run for a 3rd term. But if you're telling me it was more appropriate to limit my term and put term limits in, I would have gone along with it. I think the same needs to apply to the United States Congress. It's applying to the president. It should apply to congressmen and women as well. and any abuse of their authority or there, it's what we call fiduciary capacity. If you're in a fiduciary position and you're working supposedly on behalf of the citizens who hired you, and you take advantage of that power, weight, and authority and influence to gain something personal. Would someone tell me how Nancy Pelosi can be enjoying hundreds of millions of dollars in net worth right now when
Not
that
just her,
Congress?
Elizabeth Warren, look at her salary and look at how much she makes versus how much she's acquired. Not just
Yeah,
Nancy Pelosi, so many of them.
so many of them. I picked on one, but you're right. There's dozens and dozens of them throughout the halls of Congress. And it's why I ran for Congress recently. I lost in the Republican primary, but that's okay. I'm enjoying this role right now, Nicole, and chatting with
You
you.
can
But
run again. You can run again.
let me say maybe we're being just as influential. I don't know, but it's so important to me to see people like you and me step forward in using a legitimate media platform to get the word out on these issues that I think are almost misunderstood by many. No wonder the public education, that's another thing. The intentional dumbing up of our students in the educational system so they're not aware of a civics class. Do you think they know what the Continental Congress is all about? Or the Electoral College? Do you think they understand what that is? I would bet you they most do not. And I think it's important that we bring back that education to those millennials and the Gen Zers because they're the grandchildren that I've worked hard to save my nickels and dimes to give them a bright future in the future, hoping there's still a gracious America out there worthy of being a part of. Hey, folks, I'm talking with Nicole Kiprilov. She's out of New York and she's been very involved with the right as a Republican political operative and strategist. She's working behind the scenes for Council Member Vicky Palladino in New York City at one point, and Elise Stefanik, Congresswoman from upper state New York. I am so proud of you, Nicole, for everything you've accomplished in and around government, but I'm also impressed with the background you have and your grasp for some of these issues. Where do you think the biggest weakness is in America right now, and where do you think the best solution for our future, for our posterity, is going to come from?
Well, I think maybe two weaknesses right now that I can identify. One is I think I talk about this a lot actually. What's happening on a national level with President Trump and his administration is fantastic, as we've talked about, but that needs to translate to a state and local level. That's very, very important. And that involves things that most people, including Republicans, don't really want to talk about or don't think is important. Like, for example, how do we recruit better candidates when we
Yeah.
run them on a state and local level? Because those candidates do, believe it or not, unlike what most people think, they do, or a lot of people think, they do have the power to make a difference, even in blue cities, even in sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. A lot of these blue areas are very, very flippable. And I've been called delusional. I've been called out of touch. But you know what? I have spent years, like I told you, working in the trenches of the bluest state in the country, the bluest city in the country. I have been on the streets. When I say in the trenches, I don't even mean, behind a computer screen. I mean on the streets, talking to people, talking to voters. I didn't do it once. I didn't do it twice. I've done it for years. And I've done it in the rain. I've done it in the snow. I've done it in when it was hot out. And that's, that is the essence of government, and it's the essence of politics. That's what it comes down to. The smallest pieces of this building up to form these operations. And so I am very confident, and I trust my experience in that. And I trust and I believe it when I say that I think there is so much change, positive change that we can bring about as Republicans and conservatives on a state and local level, and we can carry through President Trump's agenda and the incredible progress he's making on a national level. A lot of that does trickle down, but a lot of it doesn't. A great example is the transgender, issue. President Trump signed an executive order, but, it doesn't stop there. And it also doesn't stop with a bill in Congress. You have to get state legislatures to be on board, because there are still schools with sports teams, women's sports teams, that allow biological men to compete against women and to erase their achievements. You're still going to have that unless you have that activism on a state and local level. I mean, look, we see that with right now with the feud between the White House and the Maine governor, Janet Mills, right? It was completely out of touch with the people of Maine. But she is in power. She is, unfortunately, for the people of Maine and for the people of this country, in power. And so that change.
Full stop right there, if I may. Please let me interrupt. Janet Mills, the governor. Do you believe the citizens of Maine elected her knowing she was that extreme in her thinking of transgenderism?
No, I don't think so, because look, the people of Maine, there was a study that recently came out. It was by the American Parents Coalition, and it found that I think it was about 63% of registered Maine voters, these are voters in Maine, said that school sports participation should be based solely on biological sex. And then an even higher percentage, I think 65 or 66%, it was a few percentage points higher, said that women's sports is only for biological women. So the people of Maine do not agree with her. She is not representing the people of Maine. Do you know who is representing the people of Maine? State Representative Laurel Libby, who has been censured in the state legislature because she identified a trans athlete competing in women's sports. The judge who ruled against her is a rogue activist judge who was appointed by Joe Biden, right before he left office in January. And look, the reality here, this is such a stark contrast. Laurel Libby of Maine was protecting her constituents. She was doing this comes first full circle. She was doing exactly what she was elected to do. This is her job. She is a public servant, and she is a hero for putting her well-being and career on the line for her constituents. She is a model representative, and she's a complete foil to people like Maine Governor Janet Mills, who fails to follow the will of her people and should resign immediately. And frankly, I think she should be prosecuted by Pam Bondi for breaking a lot of laws.
There you go. And that's where I'm talking about that amendment I was mentioning earlier. A consequence for elected people doing bad things that hurt the American people. There must be consequences. They can't claim there's a level of immunity or protections under the law because you're an elected official. Nonsense. If you are doing wrong, you're out of there. Help me understand something. I'm a little older than you, and I was on the high school and college track team, and this was never an issue. What has changed? Is it a political perversion, or is it a social political perversion of the American culture that it even brings this to the forefront? Or is this a deep state demonic effort to steer your attention? Remember my 3 Ds: divert, deflect, and distract. Let's keep those crazy Americans focused on this nonsense while we undermine the underpinnings of America altogether. Could it be a deep state? I mean, because to me, it's so, I know we're not on TV, but I won't use the 4-letter words. It's such a bastardization of the American culture that goes against the fundamentals of how you were raised by immigrant parents who wanted to bring their child into the world in an area where there was a greater opportunity. And here it is, Nicole, backfiring in our faces. Thank God there's enough Americans, 80 million, that voted in Donald Trump, not to mention the Electoral College in all states, that made it clear evidence that America is not going to stand for this anymore. Then where do they have the audacity to continue this transgender mentality thinking? Look, I have friends who are trans, and I have nothing bad to say about them. This is what they believe they needed to do for themselves.
Well, it's not
Okay,
about the people. It's
but it's
about
not,
a
it,
concept. It's about the ideology.
well, it's about a fundamental
Yeah,
principle
yeah, I agree with you.
that
It's
there's
not,
a
I don't think,
genetic difference between men and women, and
Mhm.
if one's XY on the chromosome, the other's XX. And whether you like it or not, you're not going to change that fundamental issue. So Chief Justice, what is it, Kataji Brown, who was just appointed, wouldn't define what a woman was. To me, it couldn't be a worse choice for a Supreme Court appointment. Yet she got put into the Supreme Court. And now you're going to tell me there's something wrong with Pete Hegseth, which is where our conversation started an hour ago? Well, I think we've come full circle, but we're on the same page. Nicole, I have a problem, but you have to help me understand why America is spending so much time on LGBTQ plus and the transgender issues when we have a nation to protect, when we have a border to protect, when we have an education to improve. We were once with the Monroe Doctrine, the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, post World War II, where we did such great things for the rest of the world. And there wasn't NATO yet. We just did it because we were heartfelt, benevolent Americans. And now we're in a situation where where Europe is being eaten alive by racist Muslims who are taking over nations over there. They're not going to have to worry about Greenland or Canada being the 51st state. There's going to be a new waiting line after the tariffs are over with dozens of nations from around the world wanting to be the 51st state, second state, 65th state. There's going to be the United States of the world, not just America, because they're going to realize they have allowed themselves through their bureaucracies to be eaten from within, which we in America, as ugly as it appears to the rest of the world, we in America, Nicole, are protecting the principles of this nation. And you have helped me bring that out today. I'm so glad you joined me today on this journey of trying to figure out what America is, what it will be in the future. We have a few minutes left. You want, folks, this is Nicole Kiprilov, and she is Kiprilov, Kiprilov. Beautiful name. A political operative and strategist. You didn't talk about it, Nicole. You're the founder and CEO of Sagamore Hills Strategy and the executive director of the American Border Story. You want to touch on that before we leave?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the American border story because it's something that I think is very important right now. We're a national organization and we want to tell the stories of the victims of the border crisis. We want to expose the human impact of the border crisis that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris deeply, deeply fueled and exacerbated. And we do that predominantly through storytelling and also strategic media amplification. We want to defend the truth and we want to combat the false narratives surrounding what the Trump administration is doing, which they are doing what President Trump and Tom Homan and Chris Secretary Noam are doing. They are doing God's work. They are doing life-saving work. Law enforcement, the sheriffs, the Border Patrol, they are doing life-saving work and it has taken a toll on them and it's not easy. It's probably the hardest job right now. but they're doing it because they love this country and they want to protect this country and they want to protect the American people. They want to restore honor and dignity to this country. And that's what we support at the American Border Story. We work with journalists, we work with the media, we work with grassroots activists, we work with communications strategists. It's really a big operation, and we're all very passionate about it. And we love, we consider it an honor to be able to tell the stories of the various victims of the border crisis, not just, the Laken Rileys, the Rachel Morans, the Justin Ngarais, but also the ranchers on the border, the hospitality industry workers in places like New York City who have been dealing with so much devastation coming from, these sanctuary cities opening their doors to thousands and thousands of illegal immigrants who have just wreaked havoc on the cities and residents. And we talked to the families of victims of the fentanyl crisis as well. Fentanyl, like you said, with China and Mexico's help pouring through our southern and northern borders as well. And so we just want to ensure that the real stories from the border are heard and are told.
You are a true patriot who I've come to appreciate. And folks, I hope the rest of the audience appreciates you as well. I think they do. I know they do. And you have been so kind to give us an hour of your time to talk about. We're both GOP strategists, political operatives of sorts, and you've been working in the New York State area. Your background and your contribution has been unbelievable. I'm glad you've been discovered and people nationwide see you on the various media outlets. Keep up the good writings. I think that's been very helpful to your success. Any real parting thought you'd like to give in 30 seconds?
Well, what I can say is that I'm very hopeful and optimistic for the future. And, I hope to have kids someday soon, children, and this is why I'm doing this. I'd love to. I know it sounds cliche, but it's true. I just want to do whatever I can to ensure they have, a better future.
Yeah, it's a good way of closing. I always used to say it. My immigrant grandfather used to say it. Failure to defend the rights of other people may someday result in your rights not being defended. I commend you because that's the spirit behind what you're doing and consistent with what my grandfather taught me when I was a snot-nosed kid trying to find my way. Folks, we're talking with Nicole Kiprilov. Nicole, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Gene. It was such an honor.
Thank you. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for another episode of Gene Valentino's GrassRoots TruthCast. In keeping with the spirit of Americana and the patriotism that came through this last hour, I'm going to offer you one of our segments from Lee Greenwood. Lee Greenwood, who's been always there at President Trump's side, has a wonderful rendition of God Bless the USA. So we're going to close today with Nicole Kiprilov and myself in this episode of GrassRoots TruthCast with Lee Greenwood. Thank you for joining us.
If tomorrow all the things were gone, I'd work for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife.
I thank my lucky stars to be living here today, where the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me.
And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land.
From the lakes of Minnesota
to the hills of Tennessee,
across the plains of Texas, oh, from sea to shining sea.
From Detroit down to Houston,
New York to LA, where there's pride in every American heart, and it's time we stand and say,
oh, and I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I'd gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt of this land. God bless the USA. God bless this country. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless, God, please bless the
Thanks for joining us for Gene Valentino's GrassRoots TruthCast. Be sure to like and subscribe, and God bless America.